Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Cropper here. Let's join Sam Harris, and I contend that you're going to hear the drumbeat of war and coming persecution and prosecution, and it's going to get bad, and then it's going to get worse. And you have your options right now to join the group or be run over by the group. Okay? So you're going to get in with the collective or not? So here, let's listen to the drumbeats of war.
With Kathleen Ballou. Kathleen is a historian and the author of the book Bring the War Home, The White Power Movement and Paramilitary America. And she spent 10 years researching and writing this book. She's currently an assistant professor of history at the University of Chicago. And you may have heard her on Fresh Air, as I did. And she's appeared on CBS News and elsewhere. And there was a PBS Frontline documentary based on her work titled Documenting Hate, New American Nazis. Anyway, we cover a lot of ground in this episode. We talk about the white power movement in the United States, the difference between white power and white supremacy and white nationalism and white separatism and the militia movement. We talk about the Turner Diaries.
Now see, they're listing all these different racist white movements. You see that? Man, they're pissing me off bad. All these racist white movements, and there's racist white people everywhere! Racist white people everywhere. Fuck you guys.
The significance of events like Ruby Ridge and Waco, the Christian identity movement, the significance of so-called leaderless resistance, the failures of the justice system in prosecuting white power crimes, and other topics. And
the failures of the justice system in prosecuting white power crimes. That's insanity. The justice system doesn't prosecute hate crimes done by multicultural people. We all know that. So, Sam, you're losing credit when you say garbage like this. You're losing credit. People know what's going on in the culture around us. And to say that the justice system isn't prosecuting white racists enough is insanity. When we're surrounded by thugs that are running riot in our society and the justice system won't do anything about it. And it's getting worse in Europe, you know. They get a slap on the wrist. Robbery, 6 months probation, no time. And here you get 10 years for robbery, out in early release and stuff. And they're letting some of the worst criminals ever out. So the justice system isn't properly prosecuting white racists. What the hell?
For the delay, I bring you Kathleen Ballou.
Fucking Nazis. These guys are Nazis. This is the drumbeat of war.
I'm here with Kathleen Ballou. Kathleen, thanks for coming on the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
So our job today is to talk about white power and white supremacy and white nationalism and white separatism.
No, what they're trying to talk about is how to get people grouped up so they can attack and destroy certain groups. That's all they're talking about.
Other joyful topics. And you've written a book titled Bring the War Home, The White Power Movement and Paramilitary America. And so obviously these topics are more and more in the news as we live yet another year in Trumpistan. Just to get our bearings here, how do you come to know anything about this stuff? And maybe to start, how would you differentiate the terms I just listed?
That's a great place to begin. These terms are distinct, and it's important to understand that they describe a whole range of beliefs, ideologies, and ways that people move through the world. So the big category is white supremacy. Now that covers everything from individual belief systems to the different kinds of systems and opportunities that structure daily life in our country. Many scholars have established that America is what we might think of as a white supremacist nation. And by that I mean simply that there is an unequal distribution of resources, opportunities, and other elements of American life. And we could look at incarceration, education, health, all kinds of different metrics we can use to understand that. Now, that is historical in that it's something that was established over time, and we see vestiges of white supremacy in law and policy. And it's also individual in terms of belief system from person to person. Now, all of that big white supremacy is much more amorphous and distinct from what I write about, which is the white power movement. That is a group of activists. And I suppose I should just say, I use activist not in any kind of positive terminology, but simply to describe someone who is taking action to bring about a social and political change.
Right.
And the people that I write about are members of the Ku Klux Klan, neo-Nazi groups, skinheads, militia groups. Some are radical tax protesters, and some are other kind of stripes of anti-state belief. These groups came together in the aftermath of the Vietnam War and set out to wage war on the federal government. So what I write about is the period from the end of the Vietnam
Are
War.
you catching that? Holy crap, listen to the language there. They're waging war on the federal government. What list of people?
Systems and opportunities that structure daily life in our country. Many scholars have established that America is what we might think of as a white supremacist nation. And by that I mean simply that there is an unequal distribution of resources, opportunities, and other elements of American life. And we could look at incarceration, education, health, all kinds of different metrics we can use to understand that. Now, that is historical in that it's something that was established over time, and we see vestiges of white supremacy in law and policy. And it's also individual in terms of belief system from person to person. Now, all of that big white supremacy is much more amorphous and distinct from what I write about, which is the white power movement. That is a group of activists. And I suppose I should just say, I use activists not in any kind of positive terminology, but simply to describe someone who is taking action to bring about a social and political change.
Right.
And the people that I write about are members of the Ku Klux Klan, neo-Nazi groups, skinheads, militia groups. Some are radical tax protesters, and some are
Militia groups and radical tax protesters. How are militia groups and radical tax protesters to be put on there with the other three, neo-Nazis and white supremacists? Really? Somebody who believes taxes are wrong is a racist, is a white supremacist. War on the federal government. Do you see the drumbeat of war here? They're putting people together with white supremacists as the operant factor. White supremacy is the operant factor here. Who is in this group of white supremacists? These knuckleheads, these idiots, these evil bastards that we should just figure out a way to do away with. Who else is in this group of evil people? Oh, well, Republicans, tax protesters. You see? Do you hear the drumbeats of war and the readiness for persecution and prosecution? Now, we're not. Everybody says, oh, hey, you're not going to do gas chamber. They're not going to kill us. They are going to round people up and kill them.
kind of stripes of anti-state belief. These groups came together in the aftermath of the Vietnam War and set out to wage war on the federal government. So what I write about is the period from the end of the Vietnam War to the Oklahoma City bombing that really set the stage for the politics we find ourselves confronting in the present.
Yeah. So I want to talk about the origins of all this, but hopefully we will have something to say about the nature of what's happening in the present. So let's talk about. Well, first, you just made a few distinctions that we should clarify. So you mentioned a bunch of these groups: neo-Nazis, the KKK, the groups that people have heard about, like the Aryan Nations and the Order. You alluded to tax evaders. I guess those are sovereign citizens. These groups are not all identical ideologically. Are they? I mean, how do you parse this landscape? And is there now a formal connection between all of these miscreants, and do they help one another even if they don't totally agree?
Miscreants. See, Sam's saying. I mean, Sam's not the worst guy in the world, and he's saying, "Come on now." So what is the connection here? So they don't agree with each other? We can say that, but do they help each other even if they don't agree? What's her answer going to be? Some sort of guilt by association, because that's what the Marxists love to do. They love to paint guilt by association, then they arrest massive numbers of people and they kill them. So what do you think she's going to say to that? He's saying, what's the connection? Why can't I see a connection? Or do they help each other even though these one guys aren't racist? Is it what unites them? How are these united? Now, of course, we know that the Marxists unite the whole situation just because that's their enemies. They unite their enemies. So that's all they're doing. But what does Sam think, and what is she going to say to his question? How are they united?
So this is something that the scholarship missed for quite a long time, partly through using an overly rigid idea of what a social movement should be and should look like. Many social movements in the late 20th century are fragmented in the way I'm about to describe to you. The other thing that people do, and I think this is a very natural sort of human approach to a belief system that you find foreign or objectionable, is to try to sort it into categories. So there's a lot of early scholarship that's sort of trying to figure out, okay, how many of these people are Nazis, how many are skinheads, how many are Klansmen, and which symbols exactly should be used by which group, and exactly what variety of ideology do you find in each place. And that's all valuable to know, and certainly there are differences between some of these groups. But what I do as the historian is try to understand how this movement worked for people.
So he says, what's the similarity? How are the groups connected? And she says, that's all very interesting to ask how how these groups are different. What? He said, how are they similar? And she said, yes, that's very interesting to ask how they're different. So that wasn't an answer, was it? He wants to know the connection. And she says, well, let's not get lost in trying to look at the differences. This is the drumbeat of war. All these people are the same. Now, there are no white racist Nazi white supremacists in America today. There are none. White people are the ones that won the Civil War. White people are the ones that instituted affirmative action. White people are the ones that came up with multiculturalism. There are no white supremacist, racist neo-Nazis in America today. They are vanishingly, vanishingly unimportant on the political scene. Now, to equate everybody with them, everybody though, all of your enemies are white neo-Nazi white supremacists. Really? That's two things: transparently insane and extremely dangerous, deadly dangerous. There will be arrests, people will be tortured, and people will die. There will be camps.
Or members of it. And what you see on the ground is not strict divisions between these groups. What you see actually is a very vibrant circulation of people from group to group. And
all right, the wine glass is wrong, but it's coming along. The wine glass, all right. Look, it's just whatever.
Ideologies. And the way people in this movement describe their own activism is very similar. So one person said something along the lines of, suppose we're all Christian. It's like I'm Church of Christ and that guy over there is Baptist, right? But we're all Christian. Others describe it as they're all in the armed forces, but they're simply in the Army and the Navy, things like this. So it's important to have a mode of understanding that allows us to see not only the distinctions, but also the commonality and the fact that people moved at great frequency between these different groups and belief systems.
But are they all white supremacists, or are they all white separatists? Are they all?
See, he's pushing at this. He's like, what is the white link here? And she's saying, oh, they move back and forth. They're all the same group. They're all similar. He's saying, well, what's the similarity? Where is it?
Nationalists, do they all... I mean, I guess the one that stands out immediately to me, I know very little about them, but like the sovereign citizens, are they even racists? Aren't they just tax evading nutcases?
Well, the first thing I would say is we probably want to get away from thinking about nutcase and miscreant and words like that as early as possible.
So don't worry about the racist thing, but let's get away from nutcase and miscreant. She didn't worry about now, why can't you use nutcase and miscreant? Well, because those are just ad hominem attacks. Those aren't actually substantive, right? But racist, racist is not ever abused. It's a very clear term. Everybody knows exactly what it means, right? Racist doesn't fall into any of the problems that, oh my God, this is the drumbeat of war. What kind of a fascist is this that Sam is talking to? Sam is a leftist fascist.
Because even though the people who are in this movement have ideas that you or I might not agree with, they're acting with a pretty coherent worldview and set of beliefs. I
just want you to realize that when they come for white people, they're not going to come for white people who believe in one side or the other. They're going to come for white people.
What they're doing legible. The thing with the militia group...
I guess I've seen too many of them on daytime television throwing chairs at Geraldo.
If you think you can be a white person with correct beliefs and just keep your head down during this storm, you're wrong. That's like being a person with correct beliefs in the Soviet Union. You just say, I'll just be a communist while the communists are in power. Yeah, that's going to keep you out of the gulag.
Or screaming at Sally Jesse Raphael.
Oh, yes, you've looked at those ones. Yes, they were definitely...
I'm dating myself.
Yeah, for a little while in the moment I studied, they were really doing a lot of those talk show appearances. And certainly there are people within this movement who I think we could all agree are motivated by various kinds of mental disturbances as well as political ideology. There's one man I write about testified in front of court that he could levitate and speak to God and things like this, but he was a leader in the movement. Anyhow, the militia movement is a little bit more difficult.
That's discrediting these people. She's saying that this guy was from the movement. He wasn't an individual. He was from the movement. There was a crackpot. He wasn't just some crackpot who's doing his thing and he doesn't speak for the movement. You'd have to go to the movement and figure out what their real beliefs are. No, she doesn't say that. She says there was a crackpot from the movement and he was crazy. Now, she's not going to get any respect from normal people, but, there are a lot of people of average intelligence, and if they just hear this on the news or New York Times or from Sam Harris, they're going to think it's at least quasi-reasonable. So this is the drumbeat of war. I call it the drumbeat of war because it's stop thinking, don't think, just realize these people are your enemy. We've got to kill them. And who is the enemy? White people.
To grapple with than the earlier period that is really at the heart of my study. And what I'm talking about is at the end of the 1980s, there's this big movement of white power activity into militias. But the militia movement is bigger than white power.
Right.
And not all of the militia movement should be classified as white power. It's not kind of a one-to-one transition. What it is that the white power momentum, which is substantial at the end of the 1980s and includes a major sort of upsurge of network organizing, groups, weapons, and money, all ends up in the militias. So what I'm kind of writing against is the idea that the white power movement simply disappears at the end of the 1980s, which many people had thought. Instead, it ends up within the militia movement. So what does that mean? First of all, there are groups of militiamen and individuals in the movement that are not acting out of the same kind of overt racial animus that is what we're dealing with in the white power movement. And some of the sovereigns that
overt racial animus. That's that's a pretty small group, the overt racial animists, right? Very small number of them. So some of these groups are not acting out of overt racial animus.
Activity might be classified in that way. However, there are also a lot of cases where that kind of racial, what would we call it, race neutrality is actually simply a veneer to make white power activism more acceptable.
So the ones that aren't acting out of overt racist intentions are simply doing that to make the actual overt racism more palpable. So if you're not overtly racist as a white person, then you're just secretly working behind the lines to make racism more palpable. Wow, this is beneath you, Sam Harris. This is pathetic. This is pretty bad. Now, you remember the poem? They came for this guy, I said nothing. They came for that guy, I said nothing. Well, where were you when they came for the white people? And what were you doing? We might look at Nazi Germany and we might say, shouldn't the Jews have done something to preserve themselves? And could we blame them if they would have started shooting back or fighting back? Would we blame them?
And that's an old strategy that goes, way back at least to the Vietnam War, if not into the early 20th century. So I think we have to be very cautious with the militia movement, but certainly it is an area that deserves more study.
Right, and if I recall, this is what made understanding Timothy McVeigh and Ruby Ridge and those incidents that we'll talk about a little confusing because it was entangled with this larger militia movement. I think Timothy McVeigh was associated with the Michigan militia at one point, and it just wasn't clear what was what and what the ideology actually was.
Exactly. And McVeigh, as we can talk about, is a pretty clear case of white power activism, but many cases are less clear than that, especially in the militia years.
Right.
Let me circle back before we move on to another part of your question that I think is a really good one, which is how we think about those other terms, white nationalism and white separatism. So these are often muddled terms. And I'll just start by saying that white nationalism is the idea that there is something inherently racially known and held in the category of the nation. So the idea that whiteness is an inherent part of what makes the United States what it is, and that the admission of other cultures will inherently disturb or weaken the nation over time.
Okay, so if you believe that other cultures besides ours brought into America will weaken America, you're a white supremacist. You got that? Anybody who's against multiculturalist, mumbo-jumbo, garbage nonsense is therefore a white supremacist. By believing that other cultures brought into your culture would change your culture for the worse, you are thereby a white supremacist. Do you see how flimsy their argument is? Who believes that there are a lot of black people, there are a lot of Mexicans who are white supremacists, okay? They are setting up the drumbeats of war here. They are playing with fire by pushing people, saying, if you want to defend your way of life, you're going to have to say you're a white supremacist. Oh, you don't want to be a white supremacist? Well, then you better quit complaining about taxes, and you better quit complaining about perverts running the schools. Really? That's their case here. This is hatred.
And in terms of the study of extremist groups, the best example of white nationalism, I would argue, the one I use for teaching, is the Ku Klux Klan in the 1920s. Now, that's very familiar.
That's really interesting that the Ku Klux Klan would be brought up. They were a Democratic party. They were conceived of and built and run and operated by the Democrats. And in the 1960s or 70s, so-and-so said, go take care of those KKK. And the head of the FBI said, I'd rather not. They're Democrats. But the president was a Republican. I forget who it was, Lyndon B. Johnson. He said, you go give them hell. Because they had given the Nazis hell, and now he said, you go give the Democrat side hell now, the KKK. And so he did. He broke the KKK. The FBI infiltrated and destroyed the KKK. But the KKK up till then was Democratic Party, and the head of the FBI didn't want to interfere because he was a Democrat and he liked the Democratic Party. Remember, this is a domestic terrorist organization that made a habit of lynching black people who got out of line in any way. Black people had to toe the line. And that's still the case today, isn't it? That's still how the Democrats treat black people. They are hateful racists. And she is right now saying that if you agree with freedom and with tax, if you're protesting taxes, you are a white supremacist. So she's going to put a lot of freedom-loving black and Mexican people in the white supremacist basket. And she's giving them a choice. Either be a white supremacist or leave that belief system and come pander to ours.
Example, probably to a lot of your listeners, that's the one most people study in high school. It's also huge. It was 4 million people. It was 10% of the state of Indiana. And very famously, this is where you get the pictures of the Klansmen wearing white robes and hoods and marching on the National Mall in Washington, D.C., but with their faces uncovered because it was socially acceptable. Now, what that Klan was about was state participation. And we know this because a ton of them got elected to office.
Yeah.
They were about state participation. Their slogans were things like 100% American, America for Americans, things like this. They were profoundly anti-Black and anti-Semitic, but they were also anti-immigrant and had a lot of other interests. Okay, so that is white nationalism. That's not what...
That's where the Democrats used to be. The Democrats used to say, in order to get the people's votes, they said, no immigration because that lowers wages, and no growth of this and that. You have to preserve jobs. The unions. Always the Democrats were on the side of that side. Now, it occurs to me that over time, people went to the Republican side because the Democrats are insane and they're collectivists. So over time, people drift away from the situation. So the Democrat Party is shrinking, and it has to find a way to preserve itself through other means than through the fact that its policies are useful. One of the ways that it preserves itself is by giving money away. And you vote Democrat because your food stamps and your unemployment will be gone if you don't. And your housing benefits and whatever else. One thing is they keep control of it that way. Another way is they simply import people to vote for them. That's actually, you say, well, that's insane. You'd have to have like a very, very high amount of immigration allowed in your country. Most nations in the world have very, very little immigration, almost none. Most nations in the world do not allow very much immigration at all. So, to actually run your party based on the idea that you'll get more votes in the future and your voting growth is from immigration, how could you do that unless you had alienated your population? And that's what the Democrats have done. They've alienated the populace. The one place they used to be really strong in the South Everybody in the South's, a good old boy, and they've got their heads on straight now. And they've left behind the Democratic Party. And the Democrats and the old racist collectivism is still over there. Listen to her drumbeat of war. Hate the white man, and hate anybody who agrees with freedom and individualism. You have to worship the state. You cannot believe in the superiority of your own culture. If you believe that bringing other people in from other places could ruin you, could be a negative. If you think that's negative, then that means you think your culture is superior. And since this is a white culture, you're a white supremacist. If you're against massive numbers of immigrants coming into America, you're a white supremacist. How sick is this?
Talking about from 1983 forward for people on the fringe. Because from 1983 forward, there's a huge pivot in this movement, partly fueled by the sense of betrayal felt in the aftermath of the Vietnam War, in which the white power movement is instead setting out to overthrow the federal government, to create race war, and eventually to found a white nation. So white separatism.
Wow. See? They're commit a war against the federal government. They're going to overthrow the federal government, and they're going to establish a white nation. This is much, much more than saying that 1 or 2% of the people on the right are racists, which is the actual case. 1 or 2% of the people on the right are racists. 98% of the people on the right are just fine with Candace Owens being on the right. So she's taking it from 1 or 2%, just ignoring the other 98%. The entire movement is the 1 or 2%. Absolute racists. This is hateful. Hateful and disgusting propaganda. Pathetic. Below Sam Harris to have this kind of garbage on. Spreading pro-war. I mean, dangerous stuff here.
Better for what we're talking about. But even separatism is sort of a few steps short of the ideology that's really the most popular and biggest animating push in this movement, which is not only separatism. I mean, they do pursue separatism, meaning the demarcation of a white homeland within the United States. But the end game is not separatism. The end game is overthrow of the United States and the creation of an all-white polity that eventually they envision might take over the world.
Right. So they do go that far. They have a kind of fourth right.
World domination, even? By this insignificant little crack nutcase group of collectivists who are sitting inside of the right. A bunch of leftists, a little teeny group of leftists who can't get over people's skin color are sitting inside the right. And she's blowing it out of all proportion right up to world domination. Well, let me tell you this, sister. They are unimportant. The right contains Mexicans and white people and Chinese people and Arabs and Pakistanis. I even know a guy from Pakistan who believes in freedom and individualism. So it's not going to work, your racist rant here, to scare the hell out of everybody and make them run to the left out of fear for their lives that the white man is coming. It's not going to work. And if it comes down to a war, the white man's army is going to have a lot of different races in it. So this is an ideological war. It has nothing to do with race. Racists to the contrary notwithstanding. What's her name? Kathleen Ballou. Kathleen Ballou, racist bigot of the day.
Let's complete Hitler's project kind of ideology.
They do, and
she is Hitler. She's accusing her this teeny tiny group of collectivists on the right of being Hitlerian. Hitler was from the left, you moron.
The best place to sort of see and understand it is in a dystopian novel that becomes a sort of lodestar for the movement called Turner Diaries, which really lays this out as an imaginative path forward. I mean, one thing that's really interesting about this movement from a scholarly perspective.
Some racist wrote some novel and she says, this is their world plan. Our world plan is going to be something a little bit more like Atlas Shrugged or The Fountainhead.
how they think they can possibly do it, because it's a tiny group of people, right? It's a fringe movement. And they are setting out to do what they say in the novel is it's something like a gnat assassinating an elephant. They want to overthrow the most militarized super state in the history of the world.
Now, is she making sense? Is this cohering? She says that they're a fringe movement. She says they're super teeny tiny. And she also said that you're in their movement and you're equal to them if you believe that bringing other cultures to your nation would degrade your nation in any way. That's why I call it the drumbeat of war. It's just listen to the noise. Listen to the noise. And the noise is white people bad. White people bad. This is not going to end well.
So the Turner Diaries is so important, not because...
Have you ever seen white people defend themselves?
Writerly qualities, but because it really lays out how they could hope to achieve something that radical.
Right, yeah, so, and as you point out in your book, not only does this movement get naturally seeded by disaffected soldiers coming back from wars, not just the most relevant one here is, or the most proximate one is the Vietnam War, but you point out that in the aftermath of basically every war we fought, this has been a phenomenon where some number of soldiers, albeit a tiny percentage, take their grievances against the state, the U.S. government, and direct...
Now, these are two different groups they're talking about. Racists and people who are against the United States government are two different groups. You can be very, very displeased with what the United States government is doing and have no racism. So they are mixing categories for... And he asked about this earlier. He said, are they necessarily the same? And she said, don't worry about the differences. Do you remember that answer? So now he's not worrying about the differences, just accepting that they're the same. How did she get that past you, Sam?
Back home, and this is hence the title of your book, Bring the War Home. Can you say something about that, and then we can just talk about how...
Now, why would they be making this association? There are men who come home and they say the government's run by a bunch of damn crooked bastards. They're not racists, though. A lot of those guys are black. A lot of those guys are some minority, Mexican of some kind. They come back to the United States and they say the United States government's run by a bunch of damn crooked statists. That's not racism.
The origins here and just how many people are involved?
Absolutely. So this is actually how I got into this project. I wanted to do, when I set out to write a dissertation, I wanted to study the long legacies of racial violence in the United States. We are uniquely without a sort of shared public process around reckoning with the long violence that has characterized the nation. And at that time, the only sort of thing like that had happened was a totally non-governmental Truth and Reconciliation Commission in Greensboro, North Carolina. This happened in 2005 around an event that had happened in 1979, in which a united caravan of Klansmen and neo-Nazis opened fire on a leftist anti-Klan march and killed 5 people, wounded several more. And the thing that the perpetrators and the people aligned with these ideologies said in the TRC proceedings was, I killed communists in Vietnam, so why wouldn't I kill them here? Now, I couldn't stop thinking about this. This is a profound collapse of time and space in people.
So the Klan was marching, and some people opened fire on the Klan. The anti-Klan opened fire on the Klan. So these are Republican, pro-individual, freedom people who hate collectivists, right?
Mixes up home and battlefront. It mixes up wartime and peacetime. What happened was a totally non-governmental Truth and Reconciliation Commission in Greensboro, North Carolina. This happened in 2005 around an event that had happened in 1979, in which a united caravan of Klansmen and neo-Nazis opened fire on a leftist anti-Klan march. And
Klansmen and neo-Nazis opened fire on an anti-Klan march. I'm not familiar with the episode.
5 people, wounded several more. And the thing that the perpetrators and the people aligned with these ideologies said in the TRC proceedings was, I killed communists in Vietnam, so why wouldn't I kill them here?
Oh, okay. So the Klansmen were identifying the people who were against them as communists. Well, that's a mistake on their part. Communists are their friends. They want collectivism. They want groupthink. So now that'll cause dissonance maybe for somebody who takes that seriously. But if you realize that the guy is a collectivist, he believes in groupthink. He doesn't believe in individualism. He believes the group that we should sacrifice to is the race, rather than the bourgeoisie or the poor people. But he's still a collectivist. So he's saying, I don't like that group of collectivists. So is she confused because she sees two collectivist ways of thinking competing?
I couldn't stop thinking about this. This is a profound collapse of time and space in people. It mixes up home and battlefront. It mixes up wartime and peacetime. It collapses everybody communist into the same kind of racial and subjugated category of death. This is enormously meaningful. And what I wondered is if this was going to be a story about sort of, a Rambo story of veterans returning home and creating violence at home. It turns out that it's really not that simple at all, and that this isn't a problem of veterans. What we see indeed is that there is a surge in this kind of vigilante violence after every major return from combat. But it turns out that that effect actually goes across age groups, across gender, across categories of people who do and don't serve in warfare. All of us become more violent in the aftermath of war.
Looks like, to me, there's been the aftermath of war a lot, and we've been getting less and less violent. So this is sociological garbage thinking. So if violence is going down over time, which we all know, Steve Pinker and everything, FBI statistics, we all know violent crime over time, it goes down. So after World War I, and then after Korean War, and then after the Vietnam War, and then after the invasion of the Gulf, another thing is fewer people were involved. Fewer people were involved in Vietnam than in World War II. Fewer people were involved in the Gulf than in Vietnam. Fewer people were involved in Desert Storm than in any of those. So they should have a smaller and smaller effect. Plus, they see less and less violence. Our soldiers don't fight hand-to-hand in the jungle now. They just drive trucks around and shoot stuff from airplanes and computer-guided missiles. So, yeah, transparent garbage, propaganda, utterly untrue. You can see with evidence before your face that the things she's saying aren't true.
Across categories of people who do and don't serve in warfare. All of us become more violent in the aftermath of war.
All of us become more violent in the aftermath of war. Then why does violence go down and down and down and down and down over time? It's transparently ridiculous. Well, this video is long enough. Go watch the whole thing for yourself if you want to hear more on the drumbeat of war. And just remember, ladies and gentlemen, that when they come for white people, they're not going to care about your belief system. They are going to kill white people because of the color of their skin. So either we fight anti-white racism now, or we don't. Up to you.